This adds a whole new dimension to operating the locomotive. A big hello to you. I hope you find you well. I'm Jennifer Kirk, welcoming you up here to Weir Yard. Now, if I sound under the weather, it's because I've just spent 2 weeks with the flu, a really, really bad bout of it. And if you've been wondering where I've been for those 2 weeks, that's why it is. And I'm still not fully over it, but certainly I need to get back to making videos. And in today's video, you'll hear that some of the video was filmed before I got ill and some of it has been filmed now as I've got better, so do excuse the fact that the voice will change a little bit throughout the video. But today we're going to be looking at Bluetooth. This has become quite a hot topic given that a major UK manufacturer has announced a range of Bluetooth enabled decoders that allow sound and non-sound control of a locomotive wirelessly using your iOS smartphone. And this has really galvanised a lot of interest in the market. But it might surprise the UK audience to find that actually this is definitely not the first Bluetooth enabled decoder to be on the market, and certainly if we look over to our North American cousins, there are a number of different manufacturers that have already brought Bluetooth enabled decoders to the market. And one of these is Soundtraxx, who launched their Blunami range of decoders, which builds on their very famous Tsunami sound decoders, adding in the Bluetooth wireless control. They did this last year and it has proven so popular in the US that Soundtraxx are actually struggling to keep up with the demand, making these chips fast enough. Now, whilst Soundtraxx have said that it's always their intention to bring out a UK-orientated sound decoder in this system, it's going to have to wait just a little bit until they can keep up with production. But I must admit that when I was looking through the 90 or so, yes, you heard that right, 90 or so different sound profiles that are on the Steam-orientated Blunami decoder alone, there was one in particular that caught my eye and that UK modelers might find suspiciously familiar, and that is that an A4 Pacific and its LNER chime whistle seems to have made it in there. So I'm sure this is probably somebody's little sneaky little project over at Soundtraxx, but we're very grateful for this. And it means that when Soundtraxx very kindly offered to send over one of their Blunami decoders for me to put through its paces, I had the perfect locomotive in mind to fit this into. So today we're going to be looking at whether Bluetooth control for decoders on DCC is the future. We're going to be putting this decoder through its paces, and I particularly want to see just how user-friendly the interface is. Now, this is something I think a lot of people find that when you use your standard DCC control unit, it's all a bit sort of techno-weeny, and it's quite difficult to get your head around different CV numbers, what you have to program in them, and it really does alienate a lot of people. And I'm keen to see how well the interface on this Blunami decoder actually goes to making it super user-friendly to be able to change all those settings. I'm also going to be looking at a few of the unique functions of this decoder, including the dynamic exhaust setup, and I'm really interested to see whether this is a perfect way to set up your locomotive simply with the press of one button on the screen. And finally, I'm going to be doing something that I think a lot of people have questions about, which is just what will these locomotives do if you put them on a standard DC track? And towards the end of this video, well, I do just that, and we see whether DC modelers can also benefit from this all-new system from Soundtraxx. So come with me in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabrique.co.uk. Additional support comes from Rocar Prototype Models, where detail, accuracy and value for money go hand in hand. With their debut model of SafePack auto racks wowing model railroaders alike, now is your chance to order these in road names and configurations to accurately reproduce auto rack workings from 1974 to the present day on your model railroad.
Order today from rocamodels.com and see the full range for yourself.
Well, Bluetooth has definitely become one of the words of 2023 in model rail circles, and I'm really excited to see what one of the leading US decoder manufacturers has done in their own Bluetooth wireless controlled range. So come with me and let's take a closer look.
These are the items that Soundtraxx have very kindly sent over so that we can really put this Blunami decoder through its paces. Obviously, first up we've got the BLU-2200 digital sound decoder from the Blunami range, and this is a little bit bigger than what you might be used to with a decoder, but do bear in mind that this has not just the sound decoder with all of the different sound files already preloaded, but we've also got the Bluetooth interface on there as well. It doesn't come with a plug on the end, it's just on a wiring harness with NMRA color-coded wires, and this means you can just either hardwire this into your locomotive or you can wire it to a breakout board. In fact, I'm going to be using an 8-pin board to do that, but this does have the advantage that you have all the wires available. If you want to upgrade a model, it's really easy to do, adding say firebox flicker or lamps, because you've already got the wires back to the decoder to make that job doubly easy. With the decoder out of the packet, then you can see the NMRA standard colours. So we've got here the main ones that we need for the socket with additional auxiliary functions, plus the 2 speaker wires in purple over here. Now the sound suites on the Blunami, very similar in idea to what you saw when we did the Economy decoder review, in that you can set the different sounds using CVs. So you're not limited to picking a specific locomotive and that's what you get. With this, what you've got is a lot of configurability with different whistles, different numbers of cylinders, and different other sounds as well, whether it's a duplex locomotive like a Garrett, or whether it's a regular locomotive like, say, an A4 Pacific. And that's something I really liked on the Economy, and what I have seen online from the different sounds that are available is we do have a few UK sounds tucked away. And it's because of that we're going to be using an A4 Pacific. There's no coincidence in that some of the sounds, like the whistles, suit an A4, and it's also rather apt because when we did the Economy review, I used Dwight D. Eisenhower, which is one of the A4s, for those sounds. So I've got here another of the A4 class, and this is what we're going to be fitting the decoder into. Now Soundtraxx have also sent over a pair of speakers. These are their mini cube speakers with baffles, and this is quite important because you really do have to pay attention to the impedance that the Blunami decoder needs, and if you get it wrong then you can overload the amplifier portion of the decoder, and that could cause that to blow. So don't just be tempted to use the speaker that's pre-fitted, say in a locomotive. Make sure that the impedance matches up, and at least with these we're going to use these two, and that'll just make sure that these wired in series are perfect for the Blunami decoder. Now once we get that into the locomotive, we can access it on the programming track, we can set it up, reading and writing CVs and such like with our regular DCC controller. Now I've got my NCE here, and that's going to allow us to use this as an ordinary DCC decoder, and you can just keep running it like that if you really want to. But we've also got a QR code on here, and that's going to let us download the free Blunami app, and that means that on an iPhone we're going to be able to control this using the Bluetooth. Now I know that some people have picked up on why is the iOS versions readily available but the Android versions are slower to come out. Now the reason for this is when you write software for the Apple, you only write one version and it covers a huge percentage of the mobile smartphone market. What you don't probably realize, or at least a lot of people don't realize, is that the Android, there are a lot of different Android devices and all have slightly different operating systems. And when you go to the App Store, it just detects which version you have and downloads the appropriate app. So you're not necessarily aware, but it could mean that a developer such as Soundtraxx may need to write anywhere up to a dozen different versions of the Android software just to get it to work. And that is why, if you're wondering, the iPhone version always comes out first. But just need to wait, and further down the line, as the software is written, developed and tested, then that will come available as well. So I'm going to be fitting it into Walter K. Wigham. And just looking inside the tender here, with the body removed, we've got plenty of space inside. You can see it takes an 8-pin plug, although actually only 4 of these wires are used. And I've got myself here an 8-pin plug, which I'm going to wire the Blunami to. It's color coded, so it's really just a case of a little bit of time with a soldering iron, but it does mean that I can very easily hot swap that decoder in and out of this locomotive should I need to. And I always find it's best practice to use a plug and socket rather than wiring the wires directly into the locomotive if you can possibly do that. Now what I'm going to be doing is, for the time being, just wiring the 4 that I need to this locomotive. I've got the plug in place just so that I can see which one needs to go where, and then we'll also wire in the speakers. Any wires that we don't use, one little tip that I have just to make sure that nothing shorts is to just dab the end with something like nail varnish. Once that dries, it acts like an insulator and just stops any potential problems. I'm going to cut off as little as possible of this wiring loom, and it just gives us some future flexibility if we need it. I've also modified the underside of the tender. We had a coal chute and hopper in here, which is actually hidden by this coal load, which can come out, but I've chosen to glue this in place and just cut out the base very, very carefully with a very sharp scalpel. And you'd never know from outside, but that gives us a lot more space inside, which is going to be important with the footprint of that Blunami decoder. The installation has gone really quite well and straightforward. I've soldered only the 4 wires that I truly need for this locomotive to the 8-pin plug, and that's because this locomotive is only using the power feed from the track and the power wires to the motor. There are no lighting functions, although the Blunami decoder does give you 6 100 milliamp full power auxiliary outputs for any lighting functions that you do wish to attach. The speakers themselves that have been supplied by Soundtraxx are each 1 watt in capacity, and because the Blunami decoder needs 2 watts of speakers, then this is the required amount that you're going to need to go with it, wired in series. And I've actually used one of the small bits of wire that I discarded from the original plug that I recycled to join the 2 speakers together. They are glued in their baffles back into the rear quarters of the tender, and then I've got the speaker wires soldered in place back to the decoder. Unused wires are bundled underneath the decoder in the recess that is for if you wish to fit this locomotive with a circular speaker. As we're not using that, it's the perfect place to just neatly put all that wiring. I've also used a little bit of Kapton tape just to ensure that the decoder stays exactly where we want it when we put the top back on this tender. With the decoder now all fitted into the model, it's time to take a look at what we can do with this. And first up, I want to show you the standard DCC compatibility. Now, I've got it on the track and everything is all powered up, and I've taken the liberty of putting it on the programming track and working through
all of the different things that you would normally do with a regular DCC decoder. So I've changed the locomotive ID to match the locomotive that we fitted the Blunami decoder to, and I've also changed some of the CVs as well. Now, in the paperwork that comes with this model, we've got a few different examples just listed here. But you'll notice that whilst these don't include any UK outline sounds, we can go to the full list, which is on the Soundtraxx website, and I've got some screen grabs for you here. And it is a very comprehensive list and does include the A4 Pacific. So this is a really great way of just dipping your toe into Bluetooth control here in the UK. Some of the other settings that we've got here are things like a bell volume. We'll be wanting to turn that off because UK locomotives just don't tend to have a bell. And we can also change the exhaust chuff, and I've already gone ahead and changed that to the 3-cylinder exhaust and a number of other different detail modifications to match with an A4 Pacific, including most notably that chime whistle that was so indicative of the class. You also get full control over things like whether you want the locomotive to have a vacuum or a Westinghouse air exhauster for the brakes, whether you want it to sound like a locomotive that is oil-fired, coal-fired with a regular fireman, or coal-fired with a mechanical stoker. So there are a lot of different options available. Again, showing you some of the screen grabs from the Soundtraxx manual, you can see that there is plenty of scope to even customize locomotives of the same class to be ever so slightly different from each other. Now, the reason that I chose to initially do all of this on my programming track is purely familiarity, but also I wanted to check that the decoder is fully compatible with regular DCC systems. And this is important because it may well be that it's more convenient at various times to use it in this way, and it's nice to see that it is fully compatible, and I was able to update any of the CVs in the usual way. Now, once we've got it on the track, what I'm going to do is just run through some of the functions. We've got that whistle, and I can hear the steam noises beginning. Now, there are a whole load of different spot sounds that we can play, and this decoder includes many tracks to be able to play a number of these simultaneously. And indeed, as you can hear, the locomotive does run through some of these spot sounds at various randomized moments, just to give that much more authentic steam locomotive sound. Now, I'm going to give the locomotive a little bit of power. So you can see there immediately away it goes. I'm just going to grab hold of that. And what's interesting is if I press down to give the locomotive the illusion of being a harder worked load, you can hear that that chuff rate does change. And this is a great function of the Blunami decoder that is borrowed from the Tsunami range that a lot of these sounds are derived from, that without needing any input from the user, you're able to enjoy the locomotive working harder or softer purely based upon the gradients on your model layout. And it is a great feature that works regardless of whether you're using the Bluetooth or the standard DCC interface. With the decoder installed in the locomotive, we've gone through all of those standard DCC functions, checked all those CV numbers, and actually set up the locomotive quite conventionally. So anybody who is used to DCC, quite happy with that. That is exactly what you would expect. There's nothing different there. But this video is all about the Bluetooth aspect, and that really is, I guess, the main reason that most of you are really quite interested in this decoder. And on the paperwork here, we've got the QR code, and what I'm going to do is we're going to wait for that to pick that up, and it's as simple as that, just using the camera on your iPhone. As soon as the site comes up, what we've got here is there's a couple of links here, and these actually lead you to where you can find the full manuals for the Blunami decoders, and that's where we've used some of the screen grabs to show you the different options that are available to choose for your sound profile setup. But what we want here now is to scroll down, and where it says download the app now, I'm going to click on that, and it's going to spend a moment just analysing the phone, making sure that it knows exactly what version to serve up to us. So we've got the Blue Rail Trains, this is the one, and we're going to download that. Now this might take a few moments. Once it's downloaded the application, we can just click on open, and that takes us straight into the app. Of course, you're going to have to allow it to use Bluetooth, and there we go. So we've got our locomotive has now come up here in the list. We know that's the one because we've only got one on the layout. Blunami version 1.0. We're going to connect to that. It's going to have a little bit of a think for a moment. And then we are in. And you can already hear perhaps in the background the locomotive is just doing its thing. We're getting some shoveling of coal. It's just collecting the data from the locomotive, and immediately we've got really easy access to all of the different functions. So we've got short whistle, long whistle, grade crossing. I do quite like this one. And some of the other spot sounds as well. If we want the higher functions, this is where it really makes things quite easy on a lot of DCC control systems. It's a bit of a faff to get these higher numbers, and whilst the cab chatter and all aboard is still very much more orientated towards the US market, this is where we can gain access to them, along with some of the more conventional sounds as well. And you can also see easy access to the rest of the lighting functions too. If we go into the settings, this is really where this software is a game changer. And I know that there are people out there who, let's just actually, whilst we're on it, we'll just mute the locomotive for the time being. And this is the area where I think a lot of people really find editing CVs on pretty much any control system to be a faff. It's very nerdy. It's like the bad old days of trying to install Linux on a computer, and it was just unnecessarily complex. Well, all of that is done away with here. So sound settings, we can go into the different volumes. So we've got the master volume. Main sounds, say you want the volume of different sounds to be at different levels. All of these are available here. I've got the bell turned off because UK outlined locomotives just don't tend to. We can also mess with the reverb. All of these are things which you would need to delve right into all of the CV settings, and quite frankly, that would just be an absolute faff for most people, and it's the biggest reason that people are put off DCC. This app just absolutely makes things easy. If we want to go in and edit specific CVs, we can still do that. So we've got all the different CVs here, and it actually gives you a little bit of a clue on what these do where applicable. It tells you what they're currently set to, and we can just change these on the fly. And we've got a nice scroll list here. Every single one of these CVs is still accessible, so if you know that you need to change one specific CV to a specific number to get something that you're after, that is all still available in here. Now, one of the things that the Blunami does do, which is really, really good, is the dynamic digital exhaust. Essentially, think of this as a one-step setup to make your locomotive run perfectly with all the sounds synced up, such that if the locomotive goes up a grade, the exhaust note automatically changes, and it just sets all of those CVs for you to the perfect settings. So that's going to be the next thing that we do. For the dynamic digital exhaust setup, it really is quite simple. What we need is to make sure that we've got a length of track available for the locomotive to run through the cycle on without coming up against any objects. And you can even do this on a rolling road if you absolutely need to. Just make sure that it's not pulling a train. So I've put a little cube cam on the flat wagon that's not connected to the locomotive but behind it, so you can watch exactly what happens when I hit the dynamic digital exhaust and begin calibration. And you can see there that the locomotive shoots off and then stops further down the layout, and you can see that it's altering some of the CVs and now says calibration complete. So we can go back, all the way back, and let's change the direction of the locomotive. And immediately the performance of the locomotive just fits. So I'm going to back it now onto the train. And one of the things that I actually want to do first is just put a loco nickname in, and this is another great feature. Whereas before you just had to have this faceless 1 to 4 digit DCC address number, you can now additionally signify which locomotive simply by typing in its nickname. So there we've got the name of the A4, hit return, and that, if we go back, is what the locomotive now appears in the list as, and that is saved into the locomotive. So let's see just how well this now responds. If whilst the locomotive's going round you decide that actually some of those sound settings are a bit dominating, let's go into main sounds, and let's just put the exhaust volume down, and there we can change the exhaust chuff on the fly. And fine-tune the locomotive. We now don't have that heavy bark that we had before, and this is something that would have involved a lot of trial and error on the standard DCC system, whereas now we've got full access to exactly what's going on. We've got a user-friendly graphical user interface. And again, we can go back to that main sounds menu. And there's a huge number of different options here. And quite frankly, this adds a whole new dimension to operating the locomotive. Another area where I can see this being particularly useful is if you want to do some shunting, and it allows you to get up close, see what's going on, lean in, uncouple, couple things together without being tethered to the layout by a cord that goes to an arbitrary point. This truly is now wireless. At an exhibition, it means you can go to the front of the layout, talk to people, and still operate the layout. You can even give other people the option to control the trains if you wish. And it's as simple as that. It's amazingly intuitive, and I just picked this up from the outset. I'm not the sort of person who is into the intricacies of programming, and whilst, yes, something like an NCE or the other systems that are on the market are very powerful, they do tend to isolate themselves from the people who, maybe you just want things to just work out of the box. You don't want complexity. You don't want to have to add up numbers to work out what you're writing to each individual CV. This takes that all away. And for those users of DC, you're not left out. What if I told you that you don't need the DCC system to get the same benefits out of the Blunami decoder? I've got here the locomotive sat on my DC test track. So all I've done is cranked the power right up, and then from the app, there we go. It's as easy as that. I hope you really enjoyed today's video and found it informative, and we've got a link in the description box down below to take you to the Soundtraxx website where you can find out a lot more information on these. Now, the decoder that we were looking at here in this video is the Steam 2 Blunami decoder, and they've got a large number of different sound suites available depending on which decoder you buy, which cover diesel prime movers, different steam prime movers, and also electric prime movers as well. So certainly it's well worth taking a good close look to see if there's any sound suites that might fit with the locomotives that you have in mind to fit these decoders to. And whilst these are primarily US orientated sounds at the moment, as you saw in the video, it does have an A4 in there with the LNER chime whistle, and it stands to reason that if you were very careful with your choice of the different sound functions, you can certainly put together some credible UK orientated sounds in diesel, steam and electric. And certainly these decoders, I found it incredibly easy to use once you've fitted them to the locomotive. The app is incredibly user-friendly and so much easier to program than anything else that I've used, and certainly for the first time ever I've actually found it enjoyable to play about with the CV settings, whereas before it was very much a chore. The locomotive too, the performance was dramatically improved, I felt, for that dynamic exhaust function, and certainly it's something I'm really excited to see what Soundtraxx do when they release a UK orientated version of these decoders. But what do you think about these? I'd love to hear from you in the comments section down below. Do you think Bluetooth is the future, or just a flash in the pan? And certainly, I'd love to hear from DC modelers as well. I know that some of you guys do feel a little bit left behind, but what did you think about the little snippet at the end? The fact that if you put this on a DC powered track with the power turned up, you can actually just use it exactly the same as DCC modelers can. Is this something that maybe would make you dip your toe in the water of this system, in that you could actually use this without having an expensive DCC control system at all. And it's certainly something that you can enjoy all of those sound functions on your existing layout. I would love to hear from you and your thoughts on that. Don't forget that you can check us out over on Patreon and help support the channel to keep making the videos that you want to see. And we've also got a link to our full merch store down below. And again, really do apologise if I sound grim. I am getting over flu. It's been 2 weeks and it really has been horrible. And if you haven't had the flu jab, I would urge you to go and get it, because the one thing that has passed through my head in these last 2 weeks was wishing that I'd got the flu jab, because it has really been a horrible 2 weeks. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying please like, share and subscribe. And until then, you take great care of yourself. Happy modelling. Bye for now.
Today's video is sponsored by Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. Additional support comes from Rocar Prototype Models, where detail, accuracy and value for money go hand in hand. With their debut model of SafePack auto racks wowing model railroaders alike, now is your chance to order these in road names and configurations to accurately reproduce auto rack workings from 1974 to the present day on your model railroad. Order today from rocarmodels.com and see the full range for yourself. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky 107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N from NC, NYM Irish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, NI Railways 4000 class, Ian Coulson, Alan Dickerson, Eddie Popper, Karen Nichol, Medwin Williams, Crossways Point Junction, 3B Rail, Jennifer Horton, and James Beckett. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.